So to your point, Liz, it feels like you're wasting things by picking the wrong major, when in fact you're wasting your opportunities by assuming that the major is the only decision that matters, when in fact that's not really the important decision.
Welcome back to UNHIREABLE, your podcast for an honest take on early career. Gesture has spent the last decade working with students and employers, and we're here to break down the truth that school doesn't actually prepare you for work the way you thought. My name is Kira Dempsey.
Miley Sue.
And we're here with Liz, Matt, and Kevin.
Hello.
Hello.
Today we're going to be talking about an occurrence we see in a lot of first-year students especially. So many of them, when you ask them, what are you majoring in, they immediately have an answer that they tie to their identity and who they are when they're coming to college. But a lot of them haven't even gone into their majors yet. So we think there has to be something to do with their identity that they're connecting their major to. I don't know, Miley, did you have that experience when you were a freshman?
Mm-hmm. Totally. I think coming in, I was the CS kind of track person. And I mentioned this previously, actually, in the last episode, but that kind of identity or association with the major started in high school when I first started, taking CS classes and learning about it. And so got a lot of encouragement to do it, which I think is good for women in STEM. But that means coming into UW, that was just my plan to go, at that time you have to apply direct admit. So I did that, but then I didn't get admitted to it. So that was problematic. Then I had to keep trying to apply later. When I couldn't get into CS, then I tried informatics, just any sort of tech route to go into this identity as a software engineer. So for the longest time, I really held on to the idea that I was going to go into software engineering, and to do that, I had to major in something tech related here. And I think it's something I enjoyed. I could do coding and things like that. But also it just was really easy for me to conceptualize what my future was going to be. Okay, I'm going in to do CS, which means I'm going to do CS as a career. But also it really made it easy to talk to other people about. Definitely family, when they're all excited to see what you're doing in college. They'd ask what I'm doing. And so, saying that, I'm going into computer science was a really easy answer. That was kind of the whole first part of my UW experience before I had to let go of that eventually and come into Gesture. But it was really stressful, I think, to let go of that when that was my identity coming in for such a long time and struggling with that. But did other people have, a difficult time explaining their major or their identity with major?
Completely.
Yeah. Yeah, I got lucky. I studied art, which everybody's always like, "Oh, what are you going to do with that?" Or my least favorite response was, "Oh, how fun," because people just automatically assume that's a hobby. That is not something you do professionally. But my parents were supportive. But I think, probably how you felt about linguistics initially. You're trying to package up something that you like and that you care about, and not be hit immediately with judgment around. That's a bad idea.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
Yeah.
That's actually another part I forgot in that whole kind of speech, that eventually once I let go that, I physically cannot get into computer science, and I'm a junior now, so I have to declare something. So I had found linguistics, taken classes, and enjoyed it. But I was really hesitant to declare it as my major, one, because of the kind of pathways that we talked about in the previous episode, but also because no one knew what that was. So when I'd go to family events and stuff, they'd be like, "Oh, what is that?" So it's fine. Mostly they're curious and I can explain it, but it doesn't, they don't know what it is. It doesn't mean anything to them when I tell them. So I'd have to explain a lot more about what my college experience was, and it's just a longer conversation. So it was difficult.
I think I have it two ways because I have undergrad and grad, and they're both bad stories. No, they're fine now. Everything, looking backwards.
It's all fine.
Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah.
I was a biology undergrad. I was telling myself I was going to go to vet school. No, I wasn't. But the part of biology I actually liked was sort of ecology and wildlife biology, and did some field studies in that, which it's great. Again, it's almost like paid hiking at that point, the hobbyist side. But there are no jobs. I did end up getting a lab job, which I feel like this is another episode. We've talked about a lot. Like STEM just comes with a lot of baggage and a lot of context around it. You just mentioned it, in high school pressure. It's always been there. Huge pivot. I ended up getting a graduate degree in modern Arabic and Turkish literature, to which, what are you going to do with that? That was truly, I felt for professional roles that I wanted, working in higher ed, having a master's degree helped. But even then, I was trying to rationalize it and, go back on my tropes that I've talked about in other episodes of, well, it really gives me some great skills. I'm like, yeah, not. Again, I love the humanities. I'm not trying, well, maybe we can knock on the humanities at some point, but it was challenging. It was trying to, understand that literature, foreign language, those were pretty low on people's impression of value and importance. And it felt, and I would joke about it, I would say it's a dilettante degree, right? Someone who has the time and energy and money or something. I was using tuition exemption, so luckily I wasn't going into debt to get that degree. But yeah, it was tough to rationalize all of that and to tell the story of it. And even now, I think more than anything, I just use those as talking points about why I'm so invested in this work that we do, which is how do you become a professional outside of your classes? Because really, my classes were not professional at any point.
Yeah. Well, and applicability. Like if something isn't directly applicable to a certain thing, I think it falls down on people's list of being like, okay, yeah.
I mean, in some ways, I feel like working at Gesture is a version of that. Hey, what do you do? I work at Gesture. What is Gesture? Oh, well, that's a long story. It's complicated.
It's hard to
Early
describe.
career. Yes. I think tying back to this notion, we kind of know people have opinions about majors. It doesn't matter if we agree with those opinions ourselves. It doesn't matter if they're actually true. But we know people have opinions, and they're using that information like we do to just try to understand the other person. So, it's a version of who are you really when we ask someone what their major is. And so when someone asks us, we know that is in the background. And I think, to your original questions, we see that students are, somebody says, I'm interested in X. Maybe they're interested in X, but you can try to tell they probably don't quite know what X is. And so it's hard to be, too sure that they're deeply interested in it. But there's nothing wrong with that as a direction to go. But the degree to the way they talk about their interest in X, sociology, let's say, sort of shows that they feel like they need to say they have an interest and they need to have a major. And that, I think, is something that is different now. When I was an undergrad, it was much more common for people to say, I'm undeclared. Undeclared didn't have the same stigma attached to it. That seems to be the case today, that people are not, like you mentioned, most freshmen, we did and this has happened for many years when we would work with freshmen. You'd go around, hey, introduce yourself. They'd say, I'm so-and-so, I'm a blank major. Okay, they're not in the major, but no one's really comfortable not having a major. And presumably because there's, they're afraid of what people would think of them if they don't have a major, don't know where they're going, or don't, and that,
I'm lost.
I'm lost,
Yeah.
or I'm not going to get into that, or I don't. And so there's sort of highly desired or prestigious majors, and there's less prestigious majors, and then there's not even having a major at all. That seems like the worst case, and that wasn't always the case, I think. And so I was pretty unaware when I started as an undergrad, and I actually was admitted directly into bioengineering, and I didn't really know that was a prestigious major. I actually didn't know what it was, but it was pretty close to the top of the alphabet. So I got admitted in there, and I learned it actually when I got to campus, and I moved into the dorms, and everyone's introducing themselves, and I would be like, hey, what do you, we just ask who they are and what their name and their major. That was like the standard introduction, still is, right? So I'd say, I'm Kevin, I'm a bioengineering major. And everyone was like, whoa. And the first couple times that happened, I was like, and then I was like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? What if everyone knows what bioengineering is except me? What am I should have read that thing they sent me over the summer. And So they were correct. I was not cut out for bioengineering. That only lasted a semester. But I did get what I think in retrospect I realized was that people definitely had a strong sense of bioengineering, much stronger than I did, and I was the one admitted to it, clearly wrongly. But and so then you could sort of get a sense of the landscape in that way, that there was a kind of hierarchy and a topography of different majors. But again, at that time, when I dropped out of engineering, I could say, yeah, I dropped out. That was not, I was never going to get through more chemistry, so I'm just undeclared right now. And that didn't have the same stigma. I think that feels like today that would be a much more difficult story to tell in the way that we think about college now. I was trying to get into X, and now I don't know what I'm doing. That actually is okay, but that doesn't feel okay today, or doesn't seem to feel okay today.
Yeah, I feel like, here being in gesture, now I'm always like, oh, I got rejected from CS, and now I ended up in linguistics. But before, that was not something I was proud to share, that CS rejected me two times in informatics. So, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's just such a competitive major here. So it does, I think, come with a lot of different notions about what it is. And then, so if I don't get into it, I'm like, oh.
Yeah, and this is a little bit of a side note, but I do remember sitting in rooms with people when they're finding out their major and whether or not they got in. And you could kind of feel like that thick sense of shame that they didn't get in, or like everyone's like, oh, sorry. Yeah. It was kind of like gossip almost. It's weird.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's so funny because you don't, like you were saying, like you don't actually know what any of these things feel like until you're in them. So I also remember getting into art and being in art and then wondering, like, did I pick the right art? Like, I don't know what that one is like. And like, maybe I should have, maybe that would have been better. So there's even the point of anxiety after you're in it, I think until you can really let that go and just like enjoy the classes and enjoy what you're studying. But that pressure doesn't give up always, even after you've committed to something or you get into the thing that was hard to get into. And like, if you'd gotten into computer science, like maybe you wouldn't have liked it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I certainly felt that. That's why I double majored for sure. And we talked about that in last episode. But part of it was that I would tell people I'm in history and they'd go, oh, what are you going to do with that? They would seem kind of confused. And then once I added psychology to the end, they were like, oh, okay. That was the end of the story. It was good enough for them at least.
I feel like having two majors as well, I always thought very highly of people who had double majors or minors. You're like, oh, wow. Look
I
at
don't
them.
think it was that much harder.
Your advantage in 2020 hindsight is always very, very powerful, just because you're so close to it and it's recent for you. We see a lot of other cases too, where you can come up with a very, very palatable story about what you're doing. Pre-med is huge. It still is here. We've done the numbers. I know we've talked about this in other episodes, but upwards of 90% of the people who come to this university who start saying they're pre-med never end up even applying to med school. That's and we're talking about thousands of students. What happens to all those people? And again, since we're here in gesture, we're talking about the story of what you're doing during college. If you're in pre-med, and feel like I've seen a lot of these pathways, right? Well, if you're going to get a better shot of getting into med school, you need to do more research. You need to have more clinical experience. You need to volunteer more places. Those feel very focused and directed on one outcome, which is getting into med school. And there might be some great experiences that help increase your hireability, but I worry about the people who are hiding out in that space.
And some of them stand too long.
Oh my gosh.
Too long, and then you miss out on things,
Or end up, taking time off, retaking prerequisite classes, planning to apply again.
It's not going to get easier.
I don't know. I really feel for students when I see them struggling in that space. And the same is true for anything professional, pre-law, where actually when I was working with history, lots of people thought they were going to go to law school.
I was definitely one of them.
Yeah.
For a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe a few months.
But that story is so clear, right? What are you going to do with that? Oh, I'm applying to law school. Oh. I mean, did anyone question you after you said that?
No,
for
my
those
mom really liked that story.
Yeah.
Did
So did
she?
my grandparents.
Oh.
Yep.
I think my grandma was bringing that up like a year after I had already been like, I'm not doing that anymore.
Wow.
So
It's true.
How did you break free of that? How did you change the narrative with your family? Just getting a job, getting an internship, getting a job.
I mean, yeah, probably just after I graduated, I had a job, and then no one really asked anymore. They were like, okay, she figured it out, I guess. And I mean, this job's also hard to explain anyway, so it's still kind of vague in that way. But
Just tell them you're the gesture lawyer.
yeah, no one really asks, what am I going to do anymore? Because I think I'm just obviously on like one of those paths that's going to probably bounce around a little bit. It's not going to be one of those linear paths. And I feel like most adults in my life probably know people like that or are people like that. So,
Well, and both of you have jobs because, you were hired into the gesture team. Both have jobs that require that you have bachelor's degrees. Like that was a requirement for compensation and human resources here for you to get hired in. I feel like if you're on that trajectory, and we've looked at these statistics as well, getting into a job that requires a bachelor's degree early. But again, we don't have a specification on what field of study it was. I mean, other students have definitely run into issues around what majors are or are not eligible to apply for certain jobs. And that goes back to the same thing, like what is the perception of that major from an external audience? I mean, employers have it stand in for so many different things. And we've had lots of discussions about, well, if it's a sort of generalist early career job, why would you preference one particular major that didn't have a certain very, very applied technical professional skill set over another? I think they're looking for other things, right? Clarity of story, ease of explaining it.
Confidence.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that comes into those majors here.
It says something, this kind of ties back to our discussion about path and often not really knowing where you want to go, right? And I think that feels like a sort of navigational problem, like what do I do now, like an action problem. But this discussion shows that it's also about identity, right? So not knowing where you want to go is kind of like saying not knowing who you want to be. And that is sort of unmooring or disorienting in perhaps even a deeper way than just sort of not knowing how to get there. So that moment of, I have a major, I can at least say I have a direction and feel like I have some certainty and a story about myself to tell. To not have a story is kind of challenges one of our most basic kind of human expectations of ourselves and that we have of others. We expect when we meet someone, we can ask them in some form who they are, and they can tell us, I am so-and-so, not just my name, but kind of what person I am and what I do in the world and how we're related to each other. And if I don't know what major I am, I don't know what major I can be, I don't know where I'm like that now, like what are you even a person? What are you? And it's sad in a lot of ways that this is the time when you're supposed to be able to say that. This is the time in your life when that actually is the right answer. And that is what I feel like has changed. Like that was okay to be undecided in college. It didn't mean like I'm never going to get a job. I'm just going to be undecided the rest of my life. I mean, like, I don't know yet. I got to find my major. And that I'm like, oh, okay, go. Good luck. Find your major. And the pressure seems to be different now. That I don't know that the learning isn't any different. But the pressure, the sort of self-imposed pressure that if I can't tell a story about my major, then I don't really have any, I don't want to say don't have any value, but it sort of feels that way, right? Like that. I mean, the word that Kara brought up, shame, I think is one we hear that word pretty rarely in this time, but I think that's actually the right word. That is I'm Japanese, we're big into shame, but that's the right feeling, right? That we are imposing or we're letting shame guide some decisions in that way in which they shouldn't.
Like
Except in gesture, of course, we don't do that. But
I was just going to say, like, it's almost like you're wasting it. Like, I'm wasting it if I don't know. I need to know right away so I don't waste it because I'm going to miss out on things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, you are going to have to pick a major.
Yeah.
But everyone gets a major eventually. It's not that big of a deal. And so to your point, Liz, it feels like you're wasting things by picking the wrong major, when in fact you're wasting your opportunities by assuming that the major is the only decision that matters, when in fact that's not really the important decision.
And I mean, going back to your question, Liz, when you asked, like, when did that pressure come off? I kind of want to edit my answer as I'm thinking about story a little bit more. And I do think it was partially when I had an internship and other activities going on that I could speak to my family members. I mean, the job was when it really, like, people just stopped asking questions because I had a job. But when they were asking questions, I stopped saying, what am I doing with my major? And I started saying, I don't know, but this is what I'm doing right now. And like what I'm working on right now. And I think that helped a lot, even though still the gesture internship experience was still hard to describe to people. And this is just kind of a funny aside. My grandparents thought I worked at Amazon too after the externships, even though I tried to tell them multiple times that wasn't what was happening. But I think that's when it got easier too.
Well, you always bring up the story of, if you ask someone like, hey, what are you studying? And they're like, oh, I'm studying blank. It can be anything. Or I just go to Harvard, right? You pick a super elite institution. It immediately tells a story, right? Like the prestige value of that is so high and it's so accepted. Well, you got into Harvard. Does it matter what you study?
Yeah, you're smart, you're capable, you're going to get,
And I think we've talked about this too, that we have stand-ins at this university. I'm sure every university has that, Like Miley was talking about, if you get into computer science at this university, that is prestigious. It is very hard to get into. The students who get in, and again, Miley and Kira, people should know this, I've seen their transcripts, are both very smart, much smarter than me. That said, at this place, there's a hierarchy, and the prestige assigned to people getting into computer science is higher than other majors. Students know that. External people know that, which is why when the employers come, our computer science school has no problem attracting employers because they know what they're getting. And I think when we start getting, and one step backwards, the University of Washington is still an elite school. Getting into the University of Washington in of itself is a huge accomplishment. That doesn't negate the stress that students feel because there is still a hierarchy. And so you're trying to navigate, where does my story fit in that hierarchy, particularly when external people who could hire or not hire me, choose to interview or not interview me, are going to make decisions based about this thing. So it's real. I think the acknowledgement of that is huge. But I think what we're trying to do with Gesture is get students earlier to be able to have a story of the value that they're bringing because of what they've done during their time at school and not simply because of school. And that's going back to a topic we've touched on earlier, which is we work mainly with liberal arts majors, which is why we're in the College of Arts and Sciences, and we're particularly charged with that issue. How do you tell the story of a liberal arts major being employable and hireable at the end of this degree, and you can't just rely on the degree?
And it's not about specific skills in a specific major.
No.
It really isn't.
No. Well, and to your point, if you know that some majors are not considered prestigious by the outside world, doesn't matter if they actually are. The point is that that's not a real thing. That's just people's perception. But their perceptions are real, and that's influencing their judgment. Then you probably should have a different story than just, I am a blank major. So if you know people don't value sociology highly, then you shouldn't. Your only answer of what did you do at UW shouldn't just be, I'm a sociology major. It should be something that accounts for the fact that they have a different impression, either telling them what sociology really is or focusing on skills. So I would say concretely, those I think are when we talk about story, what does that mean concretely? So like a little couple quick takeaways, I guess, on this. First, when somebody asks what your major is, they don't necessarily you don't need to literally answer their question. Like they kind of care about your major. They want to know, they're asking, but they're really just asking, who are you? So you don't have to answer with a major. You can answer with, I'm studying X, or I'm working on a project on Y, or I'm working with a professor on blah, 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 and talk about the things that can matter to that person, right? And so that, to your point about story, the story we craft is built around the audience that we're speaking to. And what do they need? What are they worried about? Are they just curious? Or is it a family member and you already know what they're interested in, what work they do, and you can connect your work to their work, or you just want to get your uncle off your back or to get back to Thanksgiving? Or is it a potential employer? Do you already know what their major is, so you can like connect it to their major? So we're really just adapting to the other person. So I think too often, because major is the story we're used to having in school, then we just assume that has to be our story. I think that's not often useful as the story, except when you happen to have a highly prestigious major and you know you're talking to someone who believes it's highly prestigious, then use it to your advantage in that way. If you actually are in it, don't lie.
We still have a whole bunch of people that graduate from the same prestigious majors, though, that have to stand out when they go to do job interviews, right?
Exactly.
So even if you get that,
Exactly.
you need to be able to tell a good story that's different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So understand that they don't need, you don't have to answer with your major, that you can answer in it with a different kind of story, and then understand that, what are they really asking when they're talking to you, and how can you, if they're just making small talk, or do they really want to know whether you qualify for a job, or do they want to connect you to someone else? Give the answer that answers the actual question that they're asking, which is usually not just what is your major. But I think, to Matt's point, it's a sign of the difficulty of school mindset that when we talk to a student at graduation, often the only story they have of their UW experience is, I was a sociology major. What did you study in sociology? I took some classes. Tell me about those classes. They were interesting. So they can't even tell the content of sociology necessarily. Not all of them, obviously. I interviewed a bunch of sociology majors. This is true. I just don't. So that's our fault. I mean, that's our failing. So Gesture is our solution. Let's leave it at that.
Want to hear more from Gesture? Check out the rest of the Unhireable podcast on YouTube and Spotify. For even more content, follow us on TikTok and Instagram at gesture_UW.